Hey, good to be here this morning, continuing our study. And if we look last week, Moses had gone up to meet with God. He was living a good life. He had a wife, he had kid, and he thought that that was his life, but God had other plans and came to him and gave him a commission that he would go back to Egypt, the place that he fled, and save God's people. The cry of God's people had been heard by God, and as we talked last week, if you want your cry to be heard, you have to want to be delivered. No one gets delivered that doesn't want to be delivered. And so they wanted to be delivered. Now, they are therefore going to return. And when Moses returns to Egypt, it is natural that he returns to his family, who he had left. Aaron, right? And even though they were slaves in Egypt, they still had leadership. They still had representatives that represented them before Pharaoh and before the government, because it has to be that way. And Moses is going to return, and he's going to first talk to the children of Israel and tell them what's about to happen. And we break into that in Exodus chapter 3 and verse 19. And it says, "And I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go, no, not by a mighty hand. And I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders which I do in the midst thereof, and thereafter, and after that, they will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall come to pass that when you go, you shall not go empty. But every woman shall borrow of her neighbor." And we want to say this properly. When they left Egypt, they were going with as much Egyptian stuff as possible. And even some Egyptians went with them themselves. Right? Because they were going to start a new society. And you need to take some stuff, right? So it says, when they go, they will not go empty. And we see here a verse in verse 22 that is translated incorrectly in our version. It says, "And every woman shall borrow of her neighbor, and her that sojourneth in her house jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and remnant, and ye shall put them upon your sons and upon your daughters, and ye shall spoil the Egyptians." Now this is a mistranslation of the Hebrew word, this word translated borrow, right? If I borrow something and I don't give it back, that's not borrowing, is it? I'm going to come at 1 a.m. and borrow your car and you'll never see it again. But I'm borrowing it. No. See, that's a mistranslation. The word there is ask. Ask. Ask is the word translated in the Latin Vulgate. Right? Ask is the word translated in newer editions of the Bible, and ask is the word translated in the Hebrew Torah itself. Right? So, You say, well, it says they are going to spoil the Egyptians. And a lot of times in war, the word spoil means to take somebody's stuff by force. But the people of God were slaves in Egypt. They were not in a position to take stuff by force. Now, they did get stuff. They did take a lot of stuff, but it was voluntarily given. Because the people of God in Egypt were being treated badly by Pharaoh. And that doesn't mean that the average Egyptian on the street did not have sympathy for them. They did. Some of them even went with them. But when they knew what was going to happen, it says the people of God asked of their neighbors. And their neighbors gave them stuff willingly for their journey. Like, we're leaving. They voluntarily gave stuff. So the stuff did transfer from the Egyptians to the people of God, but it was voluntarily. How do you know? That's the point of verse 21. That's the point of verse 21. I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Right? That's what it means. Now, if they're going to spoil in the sense of take by force, they don't need to have favor in the sight of the Egyptians. They're just going to take it. But God said, I'm going to give you favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So that's there. And then it says, and then you're going to ask of your Egyptian neighbors. And they're going to give you stuff because of the favor. They have sympathy for your plight. Right? They're going to act. So, in the Latin Vulgate and in the Hebrew Torah, it says, but every woman shall borrow of her neighbor. That's what it says in our version, but it says in there, every woman shall ask of her neighbor, and of her that sojourneth in her house, jewels of silver and gold. They're going to ask, and they're going to give it to them. Now, sadly, this is a couple of chapters ahead, but they got those jewels of gold and of silver, all kinds of stuff. You're going to need money, you're going to need clothing, you're going to need raiment, you need a lot of things. But sadly, a lot of it wound up melted down in a calf later on. But this is where it came from originally, right? As we continue down, we're going to skip to chapter 4, Exodus chapter 4, and verse 28. Exodus 4 and 28. It says, and Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord who had sent him, and all the signs which he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron went together, all the elders of the children of Israel. Moses is first of all going to Aaron. Then Moses and Aaron are going to the elders of the children of Israel. Right? If Moses is going to be the leader, the first people he's going to have to convince is not Pharaoh. It's the people of Israel. Anybody who's going to be a leader, people say, well, I don't need to convince the people. I'm coming here from God. You ever heard people take that attitude? I don't need to worry about the people think. I'm on a mission from God. Right? Well, if you're on a mission from God that involves those people, you need to care what they think. Moses was definitely on a mission from God, was he not? We just coming from the burning bush. But he didn't just say, I'm on a mission from God, you all need to follow me. No. Before he went to Pharaoh, he had to convince those people. Right? We need to do away with this notion that I am so high up in spiritual authority from God that I don't have to care what the people think. Right? Moses was on a mission from God. He just talked to God on Mount Sinai. And when he comes back to Egypt, the first place he goes is to see Aaron. And the second place they both go together is to see the elders of the children of Israel. Moses didn't go to the elders of the children of Israel by himself. He went with Aaron. Right? Because Moses had already told God, I'm not good at speaking. And Aaron was good at speaking. Moses was away having a wife and children and a family. And Aaron was there with the people. So Moses needed Aaron's backing if this was going to work. Right? Moses and Aaron went together to all the elders of the children of Israel. And Aaron spoke. Why did Aaron speak instead of Moses? Because Aaron was good at speaking. Here's the thing. If we're going to accomplish things from the Lord, you can't have jealousy amongst those who are delivering the message. Moses can't take the attitude, I'm the leader here, you sit down and be quiet, Aaron. Right? I have seen congregations, not here, where somebody with talent is put down because it's a threat to the leader of that congregation. And they see every body in their congregation that has any talent as a threat to them, not a help to them. Right? There's an old Russian proverb. The nail that stands up is the one that gets hammered. Right? The nail that stands up is the one that gets hammered. So Moses could not be jealous of Aaron's ability to speak eloquently. He used it. Because when they went to the elders of the children of Israel, Aaron spoke. If Moses is going to have credibility, it's going to have to be Aaron that convinces them. Right? Verse 30, Exodus 4, verse 30 says, Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken unto Moses. See, Moses didn't speak them, Aaron spoke them. And did all the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed. Now Moses didn't take the attitude, well, how come they believed when you said it? It says all the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their affliction, when they bowed their heads, then they bowed their heads and worshipped. See, they had been praying for deliverance. Remember that in the last lesson? They had been praying for deliverance. And God heard their cry. And God went to Moses and said, you're on a mission now. There's a time lag, though. God went to Moses. Moses went up Mount Sinai. Moses got the direction from God. Moses came back home. Moses took the journey all the way back into Egypt. Moses had to meet. You can't lose faith in God in that interim period where God is working, but it hasn't yet come to pass. Don't lose faith that God has not heard your cry, that God has not heard your prayer. He's working something. You don't know what it is. They didn't know what it is. They didn't know that God was talking to Moses on Mount Sinai. All they knew was, we've prayed for deliverance, and that was like 3 days ago, and no deliverance has come. You got to be in God's timeline. God is working something. Right? All these things had to happen first, but God was working. God had heard them. But now they come to the children of Israel and they say, okay. Basically what they're saying is, okay, we're on board. We're going to worship the God of our fathers, the God of our ancestors, and we're going to put some trust in what you're saying to us. Again, Aaron was given to Moses because he had communication skills. Anytime Moses said to God, I am not eloquent, and he said that in Exodus 4:10, Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither hereto nor since hast thou spoken unto thy servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. This is Moses trying to get out of it, but at the same time, he's not wrong. Because God didn't come back to Moses and say, oh, Moses, come on now, you're fine. He didn't say that. He just let that stand and said, I'm going to give you Aaron. I'm going to give you Aaron. He's good at putting stuff together. Right? If a man is not confident in their abilities, then he is fearful of using the gifts of others. I'll say that again. If a man is not confident in their own abilities, then they become fearful or threatened by the gifts of others. But Moses didn't do that. He had the character to use the tools that God was giving him. And sometimes the tools that are at your disposal are other people. Right? So now they've got the people on board. Now they've got the backing of the people. Now it's time to go to Pharaoh. Right? Because now you're representing the people. So let's break in Exodus chapter 5 and verse 1. It says, and afterwards Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go. Notice he didn't say, thus says Moses, let my people go. Moses doesn't have any people. God has people. And when Moses says, let my people go, he's prefacing it with, thus says the Lord. Right? I made this point before. It's a red flag for pastors to say, I don't want my people going over there. Or I don't want my people fill in the blank. Doesn't matter. The psychological ability to refer to the people of a congregation as the property of that pastor is a red flag. We are the children of God. We are God's people. We're not the people of any particular minister. Right? So that's a psychological red flag that says something about how that person is viewing the people of their congregation. Right? I say, well, Brother Kevin, it's just words. Words have meanings. And words have a psychology behind them about how people are thinking. Right? So afterwards Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I know not the Lord, so neither will I let Israel go. Let me say something. Pharaoh of old, Pharaoh of Joseph's time, knew who the Lord God was. Right? Or they had their own gods. They had their own pantheon of gods. We talked about that before. They had Ra, the god of the sun, and Isis, and Hippa. But they knew who Joseph's God was, and they had respect to that God. Right? Over time, over a few generations, people can forget all about God. It is possible. It's possible for your grandchildren's children to not even know who God is at all. I'm not talking about maybe they slipping on the standard. I'm talking about it's possible that they not know who God is at all. That's possible to happen. And it had happened in Egypt. Joseph was long, long gone. Generations had gone on. Pharaoh after Pharaoh had gone on. And they don't know anything about. Listen, no matter how good your legacy is, it will fade over time. Right? No matter how good Joseph's legacy was, and it was good, it faded over the generations. And now Pharaoh is saying, who's this God of what you speak? I don't know him. I don't have any respect for him. I don't understand his power or authority. So no, I'm not going to let your people go. That was his position. Get out of here. Right? And the king of Egypt said to them, and just so you know, some people get this confused. Pharaoh and king are synonymous terms. Right? Pharaoh is just an Egyptian word for king. So the king of Egypt said to them, wherefore do you, Moses and Aaron, let the people from their works get you to your burdens? Now that's a little cumbersome sentence in 16th century English. But what he's saying is, Moses and Aaron, how is it that you have time on your hands to think about rebelling and leaving? Get back to work. Let me translate that. What he's saying is, you won't be trying to organize a union if you're too busy working. Get back to work. What's this I hear in the workforce? People whining about wanting to leave. You know what that means? This is Pharaoh. You know what that means? They don't have enough work. If they have enough work, they won't have time to think about rebelling against me. That's what he's saying. And remember, he is a type of the devil. And what happens when people who are in sin, who are in bondage, when they start thinking, even thinking of a better life? When they start thinking about leaving the land of Egypt, the land of sin. They haven't left. But before a person ever gets saved, they get under conviction. Sometimes people are thinking about a Christian life long before they embark on one. Don't they? And when people do that, the devil says, I haven't made you busy enough. How come you've got time to start thinking about God, to start thinking about having a better life? And they up the burden of sin. They up the burden of sin. You know when God can talk to a sinner? In the quiet. In the still. So what does the devil want? Turn the music up. Get back on your phone. I'm not going to have God talking to you at 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm going to have you scrolling through Facebook and YouTube. Why? I don't want you to have time to listen to God. Right? If the devil sees you even thinking about leaving his kingdom, he's going to make you too busy to think about it. He's not going to give you time to think about it. So the thing that Pharaoh got from this encounter with Moses and Aaron is these people of Israel have too much time on their hands that they're even thinking about this stuff. I need to increase their burden. One, to punish them for daring think about this stuff. And two, because they've got too much time on their hands that they wouldn't be thinking about this. So let's read that again with that in mind. The king of Egypt said to them, "Wherefore do you, Moses and Aaron, let the people from their works get you to your burdens?" And Pharaoh said, "Behold, the people of the land now are many, and ye make them to rest from their burdens." What evidence did Pharaoh have that Moses and Aaron were making them rest from their burdens? The fact that they were becoming discontent was evidence for Pharaoh that they were resting from their burdens. Pharaoh commanded that same day that the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, "You shall no more give the people straw to make brick. As henceforth, let them go and gather straw for themselves." And I can't help sometimes but think of this. You might have seen this commercial or heard it on radio. Why, let's just let people do their own payroll. As if it's something people want to do. That way, nothing will go wrong, right? Why don't you do somebody else's job and we won't pay you any more money? How about that? And you like it. We'll make some commercials that try to convince you that it's a good thing. So instead of us supplying straw for you to make bricks, why don't you do that yourselves? You have more work. More work equals less time to think about the burden of being in bondage. That was the theory that Pharaoh was working under. I'm not going to give you any more straw to make brick. You got to do that yourselves. Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to cut down on the quota of bricks that are required. Right? The tally of bricks, which is the number you shall make hereafter, you shall lay upon them. You shall not diminish anything from it. Why? Because the people are idle. Therefore they cry, saying, "Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord our God." So here Pharaoh spells it out. I think the reason they're crying about going and serving God and becoming discontent is because they don't have enough to do. And that is what the devil will do with anyone who's thinking about leaving his kingdom. The devil's going to say to himself, obviously, I don't have given you enough to do. I'm going to make you waste more of your money on useless things involving sin. And you'll either have to work more or be poor. Right? I'm going to increase your burden. I'm going to increase your busyness. Right? Because idleness is what's causing, in Pharaoh's words, idleness is what's causing you to think about leaving. That's why God talks to people in the still of the night, because it's the most idle time. Nobody, not even a Christian, is talking to God when they're busy, rushed, got 10 things to do, doing a delivery, doing work, doing this, doing that. You need to make some quiet time for God. Right? A lot of times you are rushing through your work day and you're not engaged with God, because that to an extent is normal, but that needs to come to an end at some point, and you need at some point to have quiet time to engage with God through prayer and study, through listening. Right? It says in verse 9, "Let there more work be laid upon the men, that they may labor therein, and let them not regard vain words. This was the plan of Pharaoh. And it worked to an extent. Right? We're going to have to get into it next lesson, because if we start it, then we won't be able to finish in 4 minutes. But it worked to an extent, because what happened was the people looked at Moses and Aaron and said, this is your fault, basically. Right? This is your fault we have this. Because I tell you what, that became a theme of their whole journey. Anytime something went wrong, the people looked at Moses and Aaron and said, this is your fault. And we as a congregation need to be careful of that same spirit too, because congregations have a pastor, they have leadership, they have this and that, and there can be a tendency in the flesh to, anytime anything goes wrong, this is your fault. We have to be careful of that ourselves. Things can go wrong. They had a greater tally of bricks laid upon them, but it was not fair to look at Moses and Aaron and say that this is your fault, even though that's what they did. So sometimes pastors get a bad rap, so to speak, in that they are being blamed for things that aren't their fault. Right? I knew a minister one time, this is back in the 80s, nobody you know here, but they owned some property, some apartments, and people came to him and said, you are backslidden. You are renting apartments you own to people who aren't married to each other. Be even worse if they were married, but not to each other. But you are renting to people. So this person's in a hard position. You know why? That's the law. You can't discriminate. So your option is to simply say, well, I'm going to get out of this business altogether. I can't be in this business. I can't be in this business. I can't do that. If you're in a business, you have to follow the law. If somebody comes to you and says, you can't be a Christian because you're following the law, I'd look at them and say, what are you doing with your life? Right? You can have a very narrow ability even to make a living if you cut off so many things that you can't do. Right? You want to own a restaurant? You can't just kick people out if you decide that they don't meet your standards. Right? It's the same thing. Right? Oh, you can try, but it won't go well for you. Right? By owning a business, you are agreeing up front to abide by the law. If you can't do that, you shouldn't go down that road in the first place. Right? Moses and Aaron would start getting the blame, starting now, for everything that went wrong. And we need to take the lesson from that, that sometimes is, most times, is not fair. Right? Sometimes things happen. Sometimes circumstances just happen, and it isn't the leadership's fault. Right? What about the pastor or minister whose daughter winds up in a bad situation? Is it fair to say, this is your fault? If you'd raised them better, they wouldn't be in this position. No, that's not fair. I'll tell you that right off the bat. Because you don't control outcomes. Think about the prodigal son and the son that stayed home. The father in the story represents God. So what did the prodigal son went out and spent his living with prostitutes? Would it be fair to look at God or the father in that story and say, what did you do wrong that this is happening? Sometimes people raised in the same home by the same people with the same values and the same rules turn out totally different. Right? So it is unfair to blame the parents for the outcome of their children, or vice versa. Something in Ezekiel says that. Right? Cain and Abel. The list can go on in the Bible of people brought up in the same household that turned out totally different. But I have known ministers who have gotten a certain level of blame for what their children are doing or not doing. That is unfair. Right? You're responsible for you and you alone. And other people should judge you based on you and you alone. All right, our time's up, so we thank you for your attention this morning.